أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم واضرب لهم مثلا الرجلين جعلنا لأحدهما جنتين من أعناب وحففناهما بنخل وجعلنا بينهما زرعا كلتا الجنتين آتت أكلها ولم تظلم منه شيئا وفجرنا خلالهما نهرا. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم الدنيا السجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, I want you to reflect on a very simple reality, which is the one that we live in. And the fact that we are part of an ummah that is in a lot of pain, in different ways. In different ways, we are part of an ummah that is in a lot of pain. There is a beauty to the fact that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we all collectively feel pain with one another. There is beauty to this. But there's also something that we have to take as a lesson in order to make it hurt a little less, which is that the answer to making that pain a little less harsh, to making that pain a little easier, is and has been in front of us all this time in the book of Allah, in the Quran. It's a very simple thing. It's not easy to recognize, but it's a very simple reality. Unfortunately, more often than not, we are like the patient who has an ear infection but will not take antibiotics to treat it for whatever reason. They have no rhyme or reason. They just feel like, no, I don't want to do this. And seeing such a person, you would rightly refer to them as a fool. That you have the ability to lessen your pain. You have the opportunity in front of you to make things a little bit easier, but you choose not to for no good logical reason. It is very important for us as believers, in the time that we live in the place that we live in, to not allow ourselves to be so distracted by this dunya, that we allow ourselves to forget that very simple truth in the Quran. That's it. And the simplest way to follow that, to be mindful of that, to avoid being so caught up in the dunya, is finding sunan of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's one in particular that on this day today of Jum'ah, on this day of Friday, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam highly encouraged. And what is that? It is reading Surah Al-Kahf. Reading Surah Al-Kahf every single Friday, every single Jum'ah. On Thursdays here, for Isha, I read the first page and a half, just to get everybody kick-started on their Surah Al-Kahf. You feel like it's a little too long. Well, now it's a page and a half shorter because you joined the salah. You were part of Isha. And if we sincerely partake in this very emphasized sunnah of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not only does it protect us, but it also calms our hearts every single week. Every single time we begin to feel some of that pain, it calms our hearts through the lessons that exist in the narratives in Surah Al-Kahf. In particular, the men of the two gardens is a story that I wanted to reflect on today. That this story really teaches us a lot of different aspects, and I'm sure I've talked about it before from the minbar, but I wanted to reflect on it in a slightly different way. Imam Razi rahimahullah mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this story by saying that وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَرَ الرَّجُلَيْنِ, establish for them, give to them, present to them the example, mathal. Mathal typically relates to some kind of metaphor, but specifically it's something you can take a lesson from. Give them this story about these two men, one of which who had this beautiful garden. And Imam Razi rahim mentions that at this time, this is being given to the mu'mineen, to the believers, because the kuffar, those who were fighting against the believers, they were boasting about their wealth and their strength as compared to the Muslims. They were standing up and saying, we have more people than you, we have more money than you, we are better than you. This is what they were boasting about. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, give this example, present this example of these two men, one of which who had this amazing, beautiful garden, who had so much wealth that was given to him. He had such a magnificent place that he could enter into, that he could earn from, that he could relax in. And the other, the scholars differ, the mufassirun differ as to what exactly the true nature of their relationship was. But at the very least, they were connected. They knew one another as people. And one of them was very well off, and the other one was more pious, more righteous. He was a sincere believer, and he was not given as much from wealth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this story because it reminds us as believers that the only thing that anyone can truly boast about is taqwa and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the irony is that when somebody has closeness to Allah, when somebody has taqwa, they would never boast about it. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very simple for us. That to boast about wealth, to boast about material things, this is nonsense. This is useless. Whether it's power, authority, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter because it's not going to last forever. And what is the benefit, what kind of power is the power somebody has when it only goes for a certain period of time? True power, true authority is that which lasts eternally. And we remind ourselves that that does not occur with anyone except Allah by saying, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That there is no power, there is no strength, there is no authority except Allah's alone. In this story then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala paints a picture of this man's garden. He says that he had date palm trees, وَحَفَفْنَاهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ, and it was surrounded by other things, by other trees, وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا زَرْعًا, and it had even more within it. It had even more vegetation that existed within it. كِلْتَا الْجَنَّتَيْنِ آتَتْ أُكَلَهَا وَلَمْ تَظْلِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. It had every kind of possibility that you could have. It was such that the mufassirun mentioned, the scholars of tafsir mentioned, this was a garden. If you typically grow things, you have seasons. So something's not in season. Well, our garden, it's growing. It's not the season for it to grow. But this was a garden that it had so many different kinds of vegetation and fruits that there was no season that it didn't have anything. It was always full of bounty and fruit. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ. This man, he had this power, he had this wealth with himself. فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ. He said to his companion, وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُ, while he's having a conversation with him, أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. He says, I have more money than you. And the scholars mention that his associate, his friend here, is having a conversation with him about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's trying to give him da'wah. He's trying to tell him, look, this is the right way to do things. You shouldn't be so caught up in how great you are. Rather, think about Allah. Think about the finite reality of this dunya. Brothers, please scoot up. Fill in the gaps in front of you. Anything you see in front of you, fill in that gap. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ. He enters his garden, وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ, while he's harming his own soul. What does this mean? The scholars mention that as he goes into his garden, he's looking around and he's proud of himself. He's saying, what a beautiful garden that I have built. Look at this amazing thing that I have, that I own, that is from me alone. And then he says something, قَالَ مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. Still having this conversation with his friend, is you're telling me that I'm going to die, that my life is going to end, and I'm going to go back to Allah. Well, what I see around me, I don't think this is ever going to end. I think the beauty of this garden is never going to finish. I don't think that this is ever going to be something where I don't have this power, this wealth. And then he also makes a very simple statement. He says, well, look, even if what you're saying is true, that even if this is actually going to happen, وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً, I don't think it's going to happen, but وَلَئِن رُدِّدتُّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. Even if this does happen, these things that you're talking about, the stuff that you're mentioning is going to happen, well, I'm just going to get better than this then. Because for him, his wealth was a sign. For him, his wealth told him a story. It said that you are loved, you are excellent, you are better. This is the story that his wealth told him. When in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only gives to such an extent to these people in order to drive them further away from himself. Because he knows the nature of man. He is the one who shaped and formed you as an individual, and he knows exactly what more wealth will do, what less wealth will do. And the person who is so arrogant to think that this is from me, this is mine, this is what I have built, and this is going to last forever, Allah does not want that person closer to him. And so he gives him more. So he continues to fill his head with foolish thoughts and think to himself that, you know what, I'm going to live forever. I'm going to have this wealth as long as I want. Things are going to be great as long as I want. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases him for, is to push him away from Allah. We ask Allah to protect us from such a thing. His friend tries to continue reasoning with him. قَالَ لَهُ صَاحِبُهُ. His companion says to him, وَهُوَ يُحَاوِلُ. He's still having this conversation. He's still engaging with him. أَكَفَرْتَ بِالَّذِي خَلَقَكَ. Are you going to disbelieve in the one who created you min turab, from dirt, who took you and made you into life? ثُمَّ مِن نُطْفَةٍ. Then he made you into this little clot. ثُمَّ سَوَّاكَ رَجُلًا. Then he brought you out. And through this, what he's reminding him is that you had a beginning. You as a creation had a beginning. And there is a reality for created things that they all have an end. He's trying to remind him through this. You were created. This garden was created. And all created things have an expiration. All created things have an end. And he says, لَكِنَّهُ اللَّهُ رَبِّي وَلَا أُشْرِكُ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. But Allah is my Lord, and I will not act like you are. I'm not going to associate partners with him. I'm not going to think that I'm at his level. Because the reality is, for someone to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot take human beings and bring them back, that he cannot bring life back to his creation and have them all stand in judgment, is to make him musawiya. It's to make him in line with his own creation. And this is a form of shirk, because Allah is above all of that. That those who oppress, those who do good, those who are evil, those who are righteous, every single person will stand up once again after their death in front of him. There is no denying this. But this is Allah's power. This is not a power we as human beings have. And then he says, وَلَوْلَا إِذْ دَخَلْتَ جَنَّتَكَ. If when you had entered into your garden, that قُلْتَ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. If only you had said that what I've been given is from Allah. What has existed here, this bounty that I have, this beauty that I have, this wondrous, amazing rizq, this is from Allah. If only you'd said that, and that only He has that power to give it to me and to take it away. If you'd said that, you would have been in a far better place. إِن تَرَنِي أَنَا أَقَلَّ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَوَلَدًا. Even if you are still so arrogant that you would look at me and say that, oh, you're less than me because you have less money and you have less family. And then he tells him something. فَعَسَىٰ رَبِّي أَن يُؤْتِيَنِي خَيْرًا مِنْ جَنَّتِكَ. It might be that Allah gives me better than even what you have today. And he's giving a dual reference. He's saying it might be that Allah will give me better in this life, but also in the next life. That whatever struggles I may face here, they are temporary, they will end one day. And no matter what, at the end of that line, if I'm patient, if I'm righteous, if I do what Allah has asked of me, I will have an ending that is far better. I will have an ending that is far better. And then he says, وَيُرْسِلَ عَلَيْهَا حُسْبَانًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَتُصْبِحَ صَعِيدًا زَلَقًا. Allah might send down some destruction on your garden. And it might be flat, scorched earth. أو يصبح ماؤها غورا فلن تستطيع له الطلب. Or it might be that you'll never actually be able to get the water that's under your garden. The irrigation that you use, it might go so deep into the ground by Allah's command that you'll never be able to access it again. And after this conversation, it jumps to the very next part of the story. There's no emphasis, no time, no amount given that, oh, this many months passed and then this and that, because that's not how the Quran operates. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells these stories for us to take lessons, not for us to be entertained. وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ وَهُوَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فَأَصْبَحَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فِيهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that after this advice from his friend, the time passes and he's standing there all of a sudden and he's just watching his garden collapse in front of him. And all he can do is wring his hands like this, just out of anxiety, fear, concern, lack of power. All he can do is wring his hands. وَهِيَ خَاوِيَةٌ عَلَى عُرُوشِهَا. While it's falling upon its trellises, while it's just collapsing in front of him. وَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أُشْرِكْ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. He says, what have I done? I should never have associated partners with Allah. And Imam Razi rahimahullah mentioned something fascinating here. That this man is still misguided. He sees calamity befalling him, and his first instinct relates to the fact that because I did something wrong, I'm having something bad happen to me. But the reality is that he hasn't woken up from his foolishness. He still is in this gospel of prosperity mindset, that if I have good, it's because God is happy with me. If I have bad, it's because He's upset with me. But the Anbiya, as the Prophet ﷺ told us, are those who are most tested, who face the most difficulty. And what this man is failing to recognize in this moment is that you don't worship Allah because good happens to you, and stop worshiping because bad happens to you. And this is part of our lesson. We don't worship Allah on this razor's edge that, okay, well, good things are happening, let me do this now, and oh, bad things are happening, I don't want to do anything. That's not how we operate. But this man still is so blinded that he cannot understand, and he has nobody around him to correct him because he's pushed away any goodness. He's shoved away goodness from himself, khair and benefit from himself. He has exposed himself as an evil person, and as a result, he is now standing alone, watching as his empire crumbles in front of him. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finishes this story by saying, هُنَالِكَ الْوَلَايَةُ لِلَّهِ الْحَقِّ. At this moment, at this time, it became very clear that the authority that exists in this dunya, the power, the strength, the ability to control, this belongs to Allah alone, and it is His. هُوَ خَيْرٌ ثَوَابًا وَخَيْرٌ عُقْبًا. He is the best at giving reward and also the best at doling out punishment, giving people what they deserve. if you've been paying attention, I'm sure you can probably see and understand that there's a second level to what I'm saying. There may be those in this dunya who stand and act in a manner that is clearly wrong, that is clearly evil. But the Quran is making it very clear, no matter how long somebody is on a path of evil, their life will end as well. Their authority will end as well. And the ones who are successful are not those who had power or authority here in this life, but those who recognized Allah's power and authority above all else. Those are the successful ones, who on the day of judgment will not stand in fear, but rather will receive their books in their right hands. Who on the day of judgment will not look on in horror as they're told about all the evil that they did and how they're going to now be held accountable for all their crimes, but rather the people who will stand in front of Allah and Allah will say to them, I forgive you for mistakes that you made. This is the path of a believer. And no matter what power or authority those have, others have, that's irrelevant. Because Allah, through this example, is making it very clear. You want to boast about your strength and your power and your authority? You want to boast about your wealth? It is going to end one day. And at the end of all of it, you're going to be reminded of one very simple fact. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power, there is no authority except Allah's and Allah's alone. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts and allow us to be people who understand. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لكم ولسائر المسلمين فأستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, I leave you today with 3 lessons as I try to do. And the first is to remind us that wealth and power are nothing to boast over. They are things to earn Allah's pleasure through. If we have wealth or we have power, it is a test from Allah to see if you will be grateful. We see this in the life of Sulaiman alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam, that they were given so much. But the test was not about whether or not they would use it correctly or this, but rather whether they would be grateful to Allah. And that gratefulness, that gratitude is expressed through righteous action. Wealth and power are ephemeral things. They will have an end. And whether you are a believer or not, the reality is that Allah has created every single thing, and every single thing as a result has an end. And that means that the wealth and the home and the comfort you have as well will end one day. To recognize this, to understand this, and to live with this is success in and of itself. The second thing is to be grateful for all that you do have and never to allow the material, those things that you have, those comforts and blessings that you have that others do not, never allow them to be a means or a cause for you to forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of us, and don't get this twisted, don't think for a second that you're going to be exempt. All of us will be asked, why didn't I make the masjid a priority? You had the ability. You weren't living like our brothers and sisters in Gaza where 70 masajid have been blown up. What exactly were you doing? And if the answer is I was chilling at home, you decide if that's an answer you want to give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You decide that. We'll be asked, why didn't you make it a priority to go for this salah or that salah? If something comes up, something comes up. Why were you lazy with your Jumu'ah when you understood that the khutbah is part of the salah? That it's not okay to just show up 1:45 and that's it. And I'm not asking these questions. I'm not the judge here. Allah is the judge. Why didn't you use your federally protected right to come for Salat al-Jumu'ah on time, to come early? And if anybody had anything to say, tell them I'll see you in court. Why didn't you do that? These are questions that we have to think about. We have to reflect on. Why didn't you read Surah Kahf? Because I had other things to do that were better. Power and authority and wealth that we have now will be a test for us in front of Allah. If we can answer correctly, then it's good for us. If we can't, it's not good for us. And lastly, brothers and sisters, know that no matter what happens, those who have power today are not guaranteed their power tomorrow. This is specifically for us to remember, for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, that there are those who are oppressing. But know that the words that this believer reminds his brother of are powerful. مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. Allah willed it, and there is no power, no strength except for His. This is a reminder that just as easily as we've been given things, they can be taken. And those who act in a manner that is arrogant, who act like what they are given from Allah, from authority or power, those who act like they are deserving of it, like it's not an amana on them, they will be tested. And it will one day be taken away from them. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed at times, remember this. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power, there is no authority except Allah and Allah alone. This is what we take as a reminder for us to make these difficult times a little bit easier through the Quran. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for all of our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open all of our hearts and guide us to the straight path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us righteous believers who are one ummah together. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتوب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروا يغفر لكم واتقوا يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا وقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
تراص وسط الخلل الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن